The sun was just beginning to rise over the dry plains, casting a soft golden light over the scattered brush and dusty paths that led through the small Apache village. The world seemed quiet, almost peaceful. But for one young widow, each new day was filled with struggle and uncertainty. Her name was Nayeli, and her life had changed forever a few months earlier when her husband had died suddenly. He had been a strong, dependable man, and without him, the burden of survival fell entirely on her shoulders. Every task, from fetching water to tending to the small patch of crops she tried to maintain, now rested solely on her. Her young daughter, only 7 years old, was too small to help much, and Nayeli worried constantly about keeping her fed and safe. Nayeli's days began before the sun rose. She would quietly slip out of the small hut she shared with her daughter, careful not to wake her. The early morning air was cold and dry, biting at her skin, but there was no time to waste. She walked along the riverbank, where the water ran clear and steady, a rare blessing in the harsh, unforgiving land. Each morning, she would gather what little she could: small fish, edible plants, and sometimes wild berries. The river was a lifeline, but it also reminded her of everything she had lost. Sometimes, she would pause and watch the water flow past, thinking of her husband and how he used to laugh when they collected fish together. Those moments of memory made her feel both warmth and sadness, a bittersweet reminder that life had once been simpler. Despite her grief, Nayeli had learned to move carefully through the world. The land around her was full of dangers. Wild animals roamed the hills, and the harsh weather could make life unbearable in an instant. Yet, it was not just the environment that made her cautious. Humans, too, could be dangerous, especially strangers. She had learned this the hard way. Over the years, she had witnessed kind gestures turned into demands, and trust betrayed in ways that left scars deeper than any physical wound. The thought of someone offering help only to ask for something in return made her wary. She had become a careful observer, reading people as if they were open books. Each stranger was a test she had to pass, and she had grown skilled at keeping her distance. In the distance, across the river, a rancher was beginning his day. His name was Thomas, a man who had lived on this land for years, tending to cattle and working the earth as best as one could. He was strong, weathered by the sun and wind, but not unkind. Thomas had noticed Nayeli on many mornings, moving quietly along the riverbank, gathering what she needed. At first, he had kept his distance, unsure if she wanted to be left alone. But over time, a quiet concern had begun to grow within him. He had seen her struggle with the heavy bucket of water, her hands raw and calloused, and he had felt a pang of empathy. He had never approached her directly, respecting the unspoken barrier she carried around herself. Still, he could not ignore the sense that she needed help, though he knew better than to assume what that help should be. Nayeli, meanwhile, remained unaware of his thoughts. Her mind was fully occupied with the daily tasks that could mean the difference between hunger and a full stomach. She moved swiftly, yet with a careful grace, so as not to disturb the small birds or animals that shared the river's edge. She often hummed a soft tune, something her husband used to sing, a habit that both comforted and pained her. The sound carried over the water, gentle and almost imperceptible, blending with the rustling of leaves and the occasional splash of a fish jumping. It was in these small, quiet moments that Nayeli felt closest to the life she had known, yet also the most acutely aware of how much had changed. Her daughter, little by size but resilient in spirit, would watch from the hut's doorway as her mother worked. She mimicked Nayeli's careful movements when she could, gathering sticks or helping to clean the small area around their home. Though young, she understood enough to know that survival required effort, patience, and sometimes sacrifice. Nayeli tried to teach her as much as she could, sharing lessons learned from her own parents and her late husband. She spoke to her daughter about respect for the land, for the animals, and for other people, though always with caution. "The world is beautiful," she would say softly, "but it can be harsh. You must be careful, my child." Despite her vigilance, there were moments when Nayeli's resolve wavered. Hunger was persistent, and the days often felt long and heavy. Some nights, she would sit by the fire, staring into the flames, imagining what it might be like to have someone to share the burden with, not just for help, but for the simple comfort of companionship. She pushed the thought away quickly, fearing disappointment or worse, betrayal. Her trust had been tested before, and she could not allow herself to be vulnerable again so easily. Yet, deep inside, a small, fragile hope remained that maybe, just maybe, someone could be genuinely kind without asking for anything in return. As the day progressed, Nayeli gathered enough fish for herself and her daughter. Using a small hand net she had made from reeds, she moved efficiently, knowing that any delay could mean that the fish would spoil in the heat. Carrying her catch back to the hut, she kept her eyes on the path, ever watchful for any signs of trouble, wild animals, thieves, or even strangers who might have the wrong intentions. Life had taught her that danger could come from unexpected directions, and she had learned to anticipate it. Thomas watched from a distance, considering his next step. He wanted to help, but he did not want to frighten her or appear intrusive. He thought about approaching her many times, but each time, he hesitated, unsure how she would react. He understood enough about grief to know that rushing into someone's life could cause more harm than good. For now, he simply observed, quietly admiring her strength and resilience. He recognized that her pride and caution were as much a part of her survival as her ability to gather food or care for her child. By the time the sun was high in the sky, Nayeli had completed her morning tasks and returned to the hut. She laid out the fish and started a small fire to cook them, the aroma filling their tiny home. Her daughter sat nearby, eyes wide with curiosity, asking questions about the river, the fish, and the birds she had seen that morning. Nayeli answered gently, trying to fill her child's world with knowledge and wonder despite their hardships. Even in the midst of struggle, she found moments of joy and teaching, small victories that reminded her of why she kept going. As the afternoon approached, Nayeli prepared a small garden, carefully planting seeds that might grow if the weather was kind. She knew it would be months before any harvest, but it was necessary for long-term survival. Her hands worked quickly, moving dirt and placing seeds with precision. Each small effort felt significant, a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, life could continue, and hope could endure. She often paused to look up at the horizon, imagining a future where her daughter could grow without fear and with enough food to thrive. The first part of Nayeli's story ends not with a resolution, but with a quiet tension, an uncertain world, a daily struggle for survival, and the presence of a man who might offer help, though neither fully understood what that might mean yet. The foundation is set. A resilient widow, a protective mother, a harsh yet beautiful landscape, and the subtle beginnings of a connection that could change the course of their lives. Every detail, from the river's gentle flow to the careful steps of a cautious woman, paints a vivid picture of life on the frontier, where each day is both a challenge and a story waiting to unfold. Days passed slowly on the wide, open plains. Nayeli continued her routines with quiet determination, moving between the river, her small garden, and the modest hut she shared with her daughter. The hardships of life had taught her to be vigilant at all times, but there were moments when the loneliness felt heavier than the physical tasks she faced each day. Some nights, she would sit beside her small fire, staring at the flickering flames and thinking about how her life had changed so drastically. The warmth of the fire contrasted sharply with the cold emptiness she sometimes felt in her heart. Her daughter slept peacefully nearby, unaware of the depth of her mother's worries, and Nayeli felt a mixture of relief and sadness. She wanted to shield her child from fear, but the world was not always forgiving. Meanwhile, Thomas, the rancher, continued to watch her from a distance. Each day, he saw Nayeli work tirelessly, her strength and resilience evident in every movement. He noticed the careful way she handled her tools, the way she tended her small garden, and the patience she showed with her daughter. It was clear that she was not merely surviving, but doing everything she could to create a life for herself and her child. The rancher admired her determination, but he also understood that her independence was closely tied to caution. She had been hurt before, and it was written in the guarded way she moved through the world. Thomas wanted to help, yet he struggled to find the right approach. He could offer food, shelter, or protection. But he knew that trust could not be demanded. Nayeli had been through too much to accept help blindly. He had seen similar situations in the past, where good intentions were misinterpreted, and even small acts of kindness were met with fear or suspicion. This made him cautious, but he also felt a growing need to reach out, to provide support in a way that respected her autonomy. One afternoon, Thomas decided to make a small gesture. He gathered a basket of fresh vegetables and a few dried meats he had prepared from his own farm. He approached the edge of the river carefully, keeping a respectful distance, and called out softly, "Nayeli, I brought some food. No need to be afraid." Nayeli froze at the sound of his voice. Her hands trembled slightly as she held her basket of gathered herbs, unsure if she should respond. Her mind raced with warnings from past experiences. People had often given her things only to demand something in return, or worse, to mock her vulnerability. She wanted to stay hidden, to retreat. But a small voice inside her reminded her that accepting help did not always lead to harm. She cautiously stepped out, her eyes scanning Thomas for any sign of deception. Thomas noticed her hesitation and kept his tone gentle. "I only want to help," he said. "You work hard every day. There is no shame in accepting a little support." His voice carried sincerity, and Nayeli could sense that he meant no harm. Still, she remained wary. Her pride and her past experiences made it difficult to trust, even in small matters. Yet, hunger and exhaustion weighed heavily on her, and the sight of fresh food stirred both relief and anxiety. After a long moment, Nayeli nodded slowly. She stepped closer, still keeping her hands close to her body, as if to protect herself. Thomas placed the basket on the ground and stepped back, allowing her to take what she needed. She glanced at the contents: fresh vegetables, dried meats, and a few small fruits. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of gratitude that was not mixed with fear. She thanked him quietly, her voice low but sincere. As the days went on, Thomas continued to offer small acts of assistance. He brought water when the river ran low, helped mend her small hut after a storm, and occasionally left tools or seeds that might make her daily tasks easier. Each gesture was measured, careful, and respectful. Nayeli began to realize that his kindness came without strings attached, though she remained cautious. Trust, after all, was not built in a day. During this time, Nayeli reflected on the nature of help and kindness. She thought about her late husband and how he had always taught her to rely on herself, to be strong, and to carry her responsibilities with pride. Yet, she also understood that accepting support did not diminish her strength. True resilience, she realized, could include acknowledging when one needed assistance. This was a difficult lesson, but the presence of Thomas made it possible for her to consider it. Their interactions remained polite and distant at first, but subtle changes began to occur. Nayeli found herself observing Thomas in return, noticing his patience and the quiet way he worked on his ranch. She saw that he did not rush to judgment, did not demand obedience, and treated the land, animals, and people around him with care. Slowly, she allowed herself to feel a sense of safety when he was nearby, a feeling that had been foreign to her for a long time. Despite these growing feelings of trust, Nayeli struggled internally. She had learned to protect herself from disappointment and betrayal, and the thought of allowing someone into her life brought both hope and fear. She spent long hours thinking about the past and imagining what the future might hold. Could she allow herself to rely on another person? Could she risk her heart and her daughter's safety on the promise of kindness? These questions weighed heavily on her, and she often found herself restless at night, unable to sleep fully. Her daughter, too, began to notice the changes in their lives. She saw that her mother was less burdened in small ways, that the food was more plentiful, and that the days did not feel as heavy. Yet, she did not fully understand the complexity of trust and fear that Nayeli carried. To the child, Thomas simply appeared as a helpful neighbor, a man who brought gifts and worked nearby. Nayeli was grateful for this simplicity, hoping that her daughter could grow up with a sense of security that she herself had lacked. One morning, Nayeli decided to take a small risk. She approached Thomas while he was tending to his cattle and spoke with a voice steadier than she felt. "Thank you for your help," she said. "It has made things easier, even if just a little." Thomas smiled gently, nodding in acknowledgement. "I am glad," he replied. "I only wish to make your life a bit lighter. Nothing more." The honesty in his words was evident, and Nayeli felt a small relief wash over her. She had begun to understand that not all kindness came with hidden demands. Over time, the two developed a quiet, respectful routine. Nayeli continued her work along the river and in her garden, while Thomas went about his ranching tasks. Occasionally, they would share small conversations, discussing the weather, the river, or the growth of crops. These moments were simple, yet significant. They allowed Nayeli to begin seeing Thomas not as a stranger, but as someone who could exist in her life without threatening it. The cautious walls she had built around her heart were slowly beginning to soften, brick by brick, as trust and respect took root. Despite the growing connection, Nayeli never lost her vigilance. She remained alert to the possibility of danger, both from the world and from human intentions. She observed Thomas's actions carefully, looking for signs that he might act selfishly or demand something in return. Each small act of kindness he offered was weighed and measured in her mind. The tension between hope and caution was constant, but she began to see that perhaps it was possible to accept help without giving up her autonomy. By late afternoon, Nayeli would return to her hut, often with her daughter in tow, carrying the small provisions Thomas had left. She would carefully store the food, tending to it as if it were precious treasure, because in many ways it was. It was a reminder that the world could offer support, even to those who had been hurt deeply before. She felt a quiet gratitude that did not demand outward expression, a private acknowledgement of the small ways in which life had become slightly less burdensome. The days continued in this rhythm, building a foundation of trust and cautious companionship. Nayeli began to allow herself brief moments of hope, imagining a future in which she could provide stability for her daughter without the constant shadow of fear. She understood that life would not suddenly become easy, but the presence of another human being who acted with integrity and care offered a new kind of possibility. And so, the story of Nayeli and Thomas moved forward, each day marked by effort, resilience, and the slow, careful emergence of trust. The land remained harsh, the tasks demanding, and the challenges ever present. But there was also a sense of potential, a small light breaking through the shadows of past hardships. In the quiet gestures, shared routines, and respectful distance, something important began to take shape. A connection founded not on obligation or expectation, but on the genuine care that comes from recognizing another person's humanity. The stage was set for the next chapter of their lives, a moment when the past and the present, caution and hope, grief and resilience would converge. Nayeli's heart, once burdened entirely by loss and vigilance, was beginning to feel the first flickers of trust, and Thomas, having approached with patience and respect, was learning that true kindness often requires time, understanding, and the willingness to wait for acceptance rather than demand it. The days grew warmer as spring moved into the plains, and with the changing weather, life continued in its quiet rhythm for Nayeli and her daughter. Yet, beneath the surface of ordinary tasks and daily survival, a storm of emotions swirled in Nayeli's heart. She had begun to notice the subtle ways in which Thomas's presence affected her life. His small gestures bringing food, helping mend the roof, offering quiet advice had become part of her days. And though she tried to remain cautious, she could not deny a growing curiosity and relief in his presence. But with relief came fear. Nayeli had been hurt before, deeply and painfully. She had learned that kindness from strangers often carried a price. Each small act of support had always come with expectations, demands, or unspoken obligations. This awareness made her wary, her heart heavy with both hope and suspicion. She often found herself staring across the river at Thomas as he worked, wondering if his intentions were truly as pure as they seemed. Could someone genuinely offer help without expecting something in return? Nayeli wanted to believe it was possible. Yet the memories of past betrayals kept her guarded. One afternoon, after a long morning spent gathering water and tending to her small garden, Nayeli returned to her hut with her daughter in tow. The sun was high and hot, casting long shadows across the ground, and she felt both exhaustion and anxiety pressing on her. Her daughter skipped ahead, humming a tune she had learned from her mother, while Nayeli carried the collected herbs and vegetables. With steady, careful movements, she paused for a moment by the river, watching the water ripple and sparkle in the sunlight. For a fleeting instant, she allowed herself to imagine a life where she was not constantly on alert, where someone could be truly trustworthy and reliable. It was during one of these quiet moments that Thomas appeared on the other side of the river. He waved softly, a small smile on his weathered face. Nayeli's heart quickened, and a swirl of emotions rose within her. She wanted to smile back, to step closer and accept the comfort of his presence, but she also felt the familiar pang of fear, the same caution that had guided her for so many months. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and spoke across the water. "Hello," she said quietly, her voice cautious yet polite. Thomas nodded and returned the greeting. "Hello, Nayeli. I brought some water and bread," he said, placing a small bundle on the ground, where it would be easy for her to retrieve. "Nothing more, I promise. Just what you need to make the day easier." His voice was calm, sincere, and measured, as if he knew the weight of every word. Nayeli's eyes softened slightly, but she did not move closer. She had learned that appearances could be deceiving, and that even a kind gesture might carry hidden motives. Yet, something in Thomas's demeanor reassured her a steadiness, a quiet honesty that she could not ignore. Over the next few days, their interactions became more frequent, though still measured. Nayeli accepted the gifts he brought, placing them carefully in her hut, and spoke with him briefly when their paths crossed. These moments were always cautious, polite, and brief, but they held a growing significance. Nayeli began to notice that Thomas never pressed her for anything in return. He never lingered in a way that felt imposing, never asked personal questions, and never demanded gratitude beyond a simple acknowledgement. The contrast to her past experiences was striking, and she found herself wondering if it was possible for someone to be this genuinely kind. Yet the question lingered in her mind, gnawing at her pride and her caution. She wanted to trust, but she feared being vulnerable, afraid that accepting kindness might somehow put her or her daughter in danger. Every night, after her daughter had gone to sleep, Nayeli would sit by the fire, staring into the flames and wrestling with these thoughts. She thought of her husband, of the life they had shared, and of the world beyond the plains that could be cruel and unforgiving. Her heart was heavy, torn between hope and fear, and the tension grew with each passing day. It was one evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, that Nayeli's emotions reached a breaking point. She had spent the day tending to her garden and fetching water, her mind filled with thoughts of Thomas and the strange mix of comfort and anxiety his presence brought her. She found herself standing at the edge of the river, watching the reflection of the sky in the rippling water, her heart pounding with unspoken questions. Her daughter was inside, quietly playing with a small wooden toy, unaware of the storm raging within her mother. Finally, unable to contain her feelings any longer, Nayeli made a decision. She would confront the uncertainty that had shadowed her for so long. She would ask the question that had weighed on her heart, even though it frightened her to do so. With measured steps, she approached Thomas, who was tending to a small patch of land near the river, and called out softly, "Thomas, may I speak with you?" Thomas looked up, his expression open and patient. "Of course, Nayeli. What is it?" Nayeli took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly together. The words felt heavy on her tongue, carrying the weight of months of fear, caution, and longing. Do you want something from me too?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. The question hung in the air, fragile and raw, carrying the full force of her uncertainty. It was not a question born of desire or expectation. It was a question born of survival, of past betrayals, and of the cautious heart of a woman who had learned to protect herself at all costs. Thomas froze for a moment, understanding immediately the depth of her fear. He had anticipated her caution, but hearing the question aloud revealed just how much she had been hurt in the past. His eyes softened with empathy, and he took a careful step closer, giving her the space to stand firm while conveying his sincerity. "Nayeli," he said gently, "I do not want anything from you. Not from you, not from your daughter, and not from your past. My only wish is to help, because it is the right thing to do." Nayeli studied him carefully, searching for any hint of deceit or hidden motive. She had trained herself to see the smallest signs of dishonesty. And yet, there was none. The steadiness of his voice, the calmness of his eyes, and the absence of expectation or demand created a strange and unfamiliar feeling within her, a fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, kindness could exist without strings attached. For several long moments, neither spoke. The river flowed gently nearby, the sound of water moving over stones blending with the distant calls of birds returning to their nests. The sun continued its descent, casting long shadows across the ground, and in that quiet space, a small shift occurred. Nayeli felt a tension inside her begin to ease, a weight lifting ever so slightly from her shoulders. She had dared to ask the question that terrified her, and Thomas's response had reassured her in a way she had not thought possible. Slowly, Nayeli allowed herself to breathe more freely. She realized that she could accept help without compromising her dignity, that she could trust another human being without surrendering control over her life. The realization was both liberating and frightening, a delicate balance that required courage and patience. She glanced at her daughter, playing quietly inside the hut, and felt a renewed determination to build a life that was safer, kinder, and more hopeful. Thomas, for his part, understood the significance of the moment. He had approached with care, knowing that trust could not be forced, and now he saw that patience had borne fruit. He did not rush to fill the silence with words, but allowed Nayeli the space to process her emotions and arrive at her own understanding. In that shared quiet, a connection was forged, not based on obligation, but on mutual recognition of each other's humanity. Over the following days, their interactions continued, with a new sense of clarity. Nayeli accepted his help with a growing sense of confidence, knowing that it was offered freely and without expectation. She began to feel a subtle shift within herself, a readiness to allow trust and kindness into her life without fear of betrayal. The question she had asked, the one that had haunted her for weeks, had been met with honesty, and the relief she felt was profound. This period marked a turning point in Nayeli's life. She began to see the world not only as a place of danger and hardship, but also as a place where genuine kindness could exist. She allowed herself to smile more freely, to rest more easily, and to take small moments of joy in her daily routines. Her daughter, too, benefited from this change, sensing the lighter energy that flowed from her mother and feeling safer and more secure in their shared home. Yet, Nayeli remained vigilant. Trust, she knew, was fragile and required continued observation and care. She continued her daily routines, tending to her garden, gathering water, and teaching her daughter. But now these tasks were accompanied by a quiet confidence that had been absent before. The fear that had once dictated her every move began to soften, replaced by a cautious hope that life could offer moments of genuine support and compassion. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the plains in soft shades of purple and gold, Nayeli felt a profound sense of relief. She had faced her fears, asked the question that had weighed so heavily on her heart, and received an answer that was honest and true. The weight of the past remained, but it no longer dominated her present. For the first time in many months, she felt the possibility of a life in which she could accept help without losing herself, and in which her daughter could grow up with a sense of security and trust. The days that followed Nayeli's question were filled with a quiet, steady change. Life on the plains continued with its usual rhythm, the river flowing, the wind rustling through the trees, and the sun rising and setting in steady succession. But within the small hut that Nayeli shared with her daughter, something had shifted. The tension that had always accompanied each of Nayeli's movements began to ease, replaced by a cautious sense of safety. The kindness of Thomas, offered freely and without expectation, had allowed her to see that not all people carried hidden motives, and that trust, when given carefully, could be returned honestly. Nayeli's daughter noticed the subtle change first. Her mother's smile lingered longer. Her laughter sounded lighter, and the evenings by the fire were no longer filled with the constant undertone of worry. The child began to ask more questions, her curiosity no longer dampened by fear. "Mama," she asked one afternoon as they sat sorting herbs, "will Thomas come again today?" Nayeli looked at her daughter and smiled gently. "Yes, my child," she said. "He is a good man, and he means no harm. We can accept his help without fear." For Nayeli, saying these words aloud was as much a reminder to herself as it was to her daughter. She was learning to believe them, to allow a sense of peace to enter their lives. Thomas, too, approached their growing connection with patience. He understood the fragility of trust and the weight of past wounds. Each gesture he offered, water, food, or a repaired tool, was measured and careful, never demanding attention or repayment. He respected Nayeli's autonomy, never hovering or imposing himself, and allowed her to maintain control over her home, her child, and her daily routines. Slowly, these consistent acts of care built a foundation that was more solid than words could convey. Nayeli began to see that kindness could exist without manipulation, and in that realization, she found a new kind of hope. One morning, as the sun rose in a clear, golden sky, Thomas approached with a bundle of fresh vegetables, a loaf of bread, and a small collection of seeds for Nayeli's garden. "I thought you might like these," he said softly, placing them carefully on the ground near her hut. "No need to worry, just something to help with your work." Nayeli accepted the gifts, her hands steady, her heart calmer than it had been in months. "Thank you, Thomas," she replied. "Your help is appreciated." There was no hesitation in her tone this time, no hidden questions or fear. The trust she had cautiously allowed to grow had taken root. The garden became a symbol of this new chapter in her life. Nayeli planted the seeds with care, showing her daughter how to tend them and explaining how patience, attention, and gentle care could yield growth. The work in the soil mirrored the emotional growth happening in her heart. As the seedlings emerged, Nayeli felt a quiet satisfaction, a reassurance that life could move forward, even after loss and hardship. Thomas occasionally stopped to offer advice about which plants grew best in the season, but he never took over, allowing her to maintain control while providing support. The slow rhythm of days gave Nayeli time to reflect on her journey. She thought often of the long months of struggle, of the nights spent staring into the fire and wrestling with fear and grief. She remembered the countless times she had believed that kindness came with hidden costs, that every offer of help carried an expectation she could not meet. And yet, Thomas had shown her that it could be different. His actions had been consistent, honest, and patient, and in that reliability, she found the courage to allow hope to enter her life. Evenings became moments of quiet reflection and shared comfort. Nayeli would sit by the fire with her daughter, teaching her small lessons about survival, patience, and resilience, while also allowing herself to absorb the reassurance that life could offer support without fear. The hut, once a place of struggle and constant vigilance, now felt more like a home. Laughter began to return in small doses, a quiet music that filled the spaces previously occupied by worry. Each night, as she lay down to rest, Nayeli felt a gentle peace she had not known for a long time. Thomas's presence became a steady thread in this evolving life. He was not intrusive, nor did he expect friendship beyond what Nayeli could offer freely. He simply acted with consistent care. And in that consistency, Nayeli discovered the profound difference between obligation and genuine kindness. Each act, whether small or significant, reinforced the understanding that she could accept help without fear of losing her autonomy or dignity. Slowly, she allowed herself to feel the first sparks of comfort and trust, a realization that change was possible even in a life marked by loss. One afternoon, as they worked side by side, Nayeli tending her garden and Thomas checking the nearby fence, Nayeli spoke softly, almost to herself. "I never thought it could be like this," she said. "I never believed someone could help without asking for something in return." Thomas nodded, listening attentively. "It is rare," he admitted, "but not impossible. Trust must be earned slowly, and patience is as important as any act of kindness. You have shown me the same patience, Nayeli, by allowing me to help without fear." Her heart lifted at his words. For so long, she had felt isolated, burdened by grief and the responsibilities of survival. Now, she understood that companionship and support could exist without compromise, that trust could be rebuilt, one careful step at a time. This realization brought not only relief but also a sense of empowerment. She could still maintain her independence, protect her daughter, and honor her late husband's memory, while accepting the aid offered by someone who genuinely cared. Over the following weeks, Nayeli's confidence grew. She allowed herself to engage more openly with Thomas, asking questions about his work, his life, and the land he tended. He answered patiently, never overstepping, never imposing, and their conversations gradually built a quiet friendship. It was a friendship founded not on necessity or expectation, but on mutual respect, shared effort, and the recognition of each other's humanity. Nayeli began to see the value in allowing another person to share in her daily life, not as a replacement for her lost loved one, but as a companion who respected her boundaries and supported her in tangible, meaningful ways. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the plains were bathed in soft amber light, Nayeli sat by the river with her daughter. She watched the water shimmer and reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The fear that had once dominated her days seemed distant, replaced by a quiet courage and hope. She thought about the question she had asked Thomas, the one that had weighed on her heart, and felt a deep sense of gratitude for his honesty and patience. She realized that asking that question had been an act of strength, a declaration of her desire to protect herself while still opening her heart to possibility. Her daughter played nearby, humming a tune she had learned from her mother, and Nayeli felt a profound sense of contentment. The girl would grow up in a world where kindness could exist without hidden motives, where trust could be built carefully and thoughtfully. Nayeli knew the world could still be harsh, but she also understood that hope and resilience could coexist with vigilance. Life, she realized, was not about avoiding danger entirely, but about finding the courage to embrace the moments of good that could exist alongside it. Thomas approached quietly, placing a small bundle of herbs and bread near the riverbank. "Good evening, Nayeli," he said softly. "I thought you might need these." Nayeli smiled, accepting the gifts with steady hands. "Thank you, Thomas. Your help means more than words can say," she replied. He nodded, his expression calm and reassuring. In that simple exchange, there was a profound understanding between them, a recognition that kindness could be real, trust could be rebuilt, and connections could grow even in the most difficult circumstances. The seasons began to change, and with them, the small garden flourished. Green shoots emerged from the soil, a tangible symbol of growth, patience, and nurturing. Nayeli tended it carefully, teaching her daughter to do the same, instilling lessons about care, responsibility, and hope. Each day, as she worked the land, she reflected on the changes in her own life. She had learned to balance caution with trust, grief with hope, and independence with the willingness to accept support. In the quiet moments, Nayeli sometimes thought about her late husband. She remembered his teachings, his kindness, and the life they had shared. She felt that honoring his memory did not mean shutting herself off from the world, but rather embracing life fully while remembering the lessons he had taught her. Thomas's presence did not replace the past. It complemented it, offering a new perspective and a chance to rebuild her life with care, dignity, and respect. By the time summer arrived, Nayeli felt a steady sense of peace. The days were still filled with hard work and the challenges of survival, but they were also filled with hope, trust, and small moments of joy. Her daughter grew stronger, happier, and more confident, benefiting from the stability that her mother had carefully nurtured. Nayeli herself felt a quiet confidence she had not known for months, the assurance that she could face life's hardships with courage, that she could accept help without fear, and that she could open her heart carefully, yet fully, when the time was right. The story of Nayeli's journey came full circle not with a grand event, but with the quiet realization that life could hold goodness even after profound loss. Thomas's consistent kindness, her courage in asking the difficult question, and her willingness to accept support without compromising her dignity created a life that was steadier, kinder, and more hopeful than she had ever imagined possible. The plains remained vast and sometimes harsh, but Nayeli had found a place within them, where trust, resilience, and gentle care could coexist, shaping a future that she and her daughter could face with strength and quiet joy.